Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Zodiac Lounge. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really happy to see so many people in chat and on the air. Looks like Annie Fox is in the house. Yo, Annie, what's up? Um, okay, so I usually have a very lighthearted, sarcastic attitude about me, but we have a topic tonight that is very serious. And as I was doing my homework and my research to understand pathology and psychological profiles and prepping my guests and hearing their stories, it has become much more complex than I thought. And we're going to be talking about child abuse, but particularly sexual molestation and what happens to the victims and how long they have to carry it. It is a riveting show. A lot of people don't like to touch this topic. They'll talk about child abuse, they'll talk about sexual abuse, but they never go here because it's a taboo subject for some reason. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of bureaucrats involved in trying to suppress it. And you're going to see how devastating it can be to the victims who never seem to get restitution. Um, I've learned a lot by planning this show and in working with my guests and getting to know them. And it's mind-boggling because I've also read case studies. I've looked online to find, people have been brought to justice and everybody's like, yay, finally, so case closed, it's all done. It isn't done. These children who later grow into adults and carry this with them for decades before they even remember that this happened to them are the real victims here. And they go unserved, they go untreated. They're often told by their families, we're not going to say anything about that. We don't want to bring shame onto the family, as if ignoring your sexually abused child is not shameful. Or people are just not believed. And a child who depends on their parents for everything gives up hope that they will ever get help, and they stay silent, and it's buried. And the longer it's buried, the more toxic it becomes until one day it erupts in the most explosive fashion. Um, the subject is so large that we formatted this show into 3 segments of the cycle from when it began, from the initial abuse until the time that our heroes, our very brave, courageous ladies that you're going to meet in a couple of minutes, realized that they had to do something about this. They could no longer keep it a secret any longer. Their lives were being affected. There were so many things going on. And we're going to hear their stories. We're going to be joined by Judge Olga Seelig, who's going to give us her perspective from the legal perspective. What's wrong with the system? What protections do perpetrators have, which really pisses me off? What what privileges and what possibilities do the victims have to help themselves, and why they don't take advantage of it? There are trust issues, there are abandonment issues, there are terrible things that happen to these children. And everybody seems to think that the show is over once the perp is brought to justice, or in the case of a very rich family, paid off, ostracized, and tortured, and nobody ever gets to hear about it. There are socioeconomic factors that will determine different fates for different victims. And there are probably millions of children who are now adults who have been carrying this with them, either consciously or unconsciously, for their entire lives. It took my first 2 guests 30 years to come to terms with this. Imagine carrying that pain, carrying that wound, leaving it untreated for 3 decades. And finally, when something that has been repressed and becomes so toxic that it erupts happens, you have the most extraordinary choices. There's a myth of Chiron, the wounded healer, that I'm not going to go through. I'll do that on another show. But the moral of that story is when you receive a mortal wound, you have 3 choices. You can either stick your head in the sand and let it just get you in the end, and you don't even know that it's killing you incrementally, bit by bit, your whole life. You can try to visit that same wound on another person, much like an animal caught in a trap will try to bite you when you're trying to free it. It just wants everybody to suffer as much as it does. Or you can heal other people with the same wound, and then by doing that externally, it will reflect internally and continue to heal yours. Um, so we are going to listen to these stories. of all three of these extraordinary ladies. And then I want to open up for questions from the audience. And we would love you on the air, but you need to know that you need either an external mic or wear your headphones, your AirPods, or your earphones, because we will get a lot of feedback. I had a show that sounded like a flying saucer because somebody had two mics or something was going on. And I don't want to get lost in the technical part of it. I'm anxious and excited to bring this to you. And it's going to be unbelievable. You're going to be able to live this with them. And there may be people out there who are going to recall their own experience that they either decided to sublimate or just kept in their unconscious mind. Something may trigger you to want to share, and I hope you do, because this is a very safe space and we have extraordinary people with us tonight. So I would love to welcome my first two heroes, my survivors, Belle Pfau and Shelley Leggett, to the stage. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Anthony.
And there's Belle. So please tell me, if it's not too painful, what I'd like to know is your first recollection that you were assaulted. Did you remember it right away? Did it take a while? From that period until you realized as a child that you will never be able to get help from the people in the family around you. So, Belle, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself first,
Sure. Thank you. I'm Belle Pfau, and I am a survivor of sexual assault as a child and child abuse and life-threatening neglect. And I now work in what we call child welfare. Most people know it as CPS. So, and I do that because of these topics. So, did you want Shelley to do her introduction, or
well, I want you to tell us when how did your story start?
Okay, so my story starts. Sure. My story starts when I'm 4 years old, and it is the second time that I am raped by my uncle, my paternal uncle. And I, because of my age and development, had forgotten the first incident after it happened. But where it happened in an abandoned building at the end of my street. He would take me and my sister, not at the same time, but different. And he would basically put us on a contraption of two sawhorses with a long, strong wooden board between them to operate as a bed. And it was when I saw that contraption for the second time that I remembered what happened, and I knew what was going to happen again.
Did you reach out to anyone in the family about this?
I did not, and I don't know why. Probably because I was too verbal. I may have been threatened.
You were also 4 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Shelley, why don't you tell us your beginning of this?
So my abuse was between ages of 8 and 10. And honestly, that's an approximation, just because so much of it you put away, you don't want to remember exact. I was the perfect victim. My mom was a single mom. My brothers were older than me. My mom's family, they were farmers. And so everybody would go out and work on the farm. And I had allergies and I was the youngest. So I just got left behind. So I was always left behind when everybody left the premises. And so there was one person who always made excuses for, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. Oh, I have to do this, whatever his excuse was. And he would leave and come back into the house. And so it was the perfect situation for him. I was alone. I didn't, my dad was gone. And so I just wanted somebody to love me. And he took advantage of that opportunity and chose to show me how he loved me, because those were the words that he used. And, eventually I said, this doesn't feel right. I don't understand this. I was young. I didn't understand what was happening. And he threatened me to hurt my mom, to physically cause her bodily harm, and told me that it was all on me, that I could just keep this to myself and my mom would be perfectly fine, or I could go tell her and then she may or may not die. So when you've already lost your dad from divorce and you've already lost so much, you feel like partially you're the hero because I can save my mom. And so if I just endure this pain, if I just endure this, I can save her. And so that's exactly what I did. I never said anything. I kept my mouth shut. I also knew when everybody would say, okay, come on, it's time to go out to the fields, I would go into full-blown panic mode. And I remember being in panic mode and I would try to do anything. Mom, I don't feel good. I mean, I would try a bazillion things. And so I got labeled the drama queen because
And
I
you
was
never,
trying.
do you ever feel confident enough to want to say, Mom, this is what's happening to me? Or did you really believe him hook, line, and sinker that she was
So
in danger?
I had really weird family dynamics when I was growing up. And at that point, not only did I want to save my mom, but my mom's family was what I perceived to be very close. And she had a lot of family members. And how is somebody going to believe an 8-year-old labeled as a drama queen? So I knew nobody would believe me and I knew it would just be worse. So I just never said anything and I let it go on for a really long time. And I, at some point after the abuse stopped, I separated myself between my first name and my nickname because I go by Shelley. My first name is Maria. And to me, Maria suffered the abuse, but Shelley didn't. And so I just moved forward after,
Okay.
10, when I finally got it to stop, I moved forward as Shelley.
So you pretty much compartmentalized the experience and assigned it to
Absolutely.
one of your names. Belle, what about you? Did you at any point think about going to anyone in your family for help?
Yes, there was an incident that forced my hand. So my parents, very much like yours, Shelley, divorced when I was 10, and we moved from Houston, Texas, where I lived as a child, to my mother's hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. And my paternal grandfather died when the summer I was 16, and we went back to Texas for that observance. And there was a family gathering, and I was relieved that my uncle was not at the family gathering. I hadn't seen him since I was 10 years old.
And he was your
And
abuser, just to bring anybody who came late up to speed. Okay.
right, exactly. He was my abuser. And so I was very relieved when he didn't show up at that family meeting. But then I was informed that there would be a second family meeting and he would be there. And there was something inside me that just would not let that happen. And so I told my mom and my dad I needed to talk to them, and I disclosed what had happened. And I also disclosed that it had happened to my sister because I knew that at that point. I didn't know that when I was 4.
How did they respond?
They believed me. They never talked about it again, but they did believe me. And I was not, we did not have that second family meeting. And my understanding after we left is that it destroyed my father's family.
Okay.
He died
So,
without ever talking to his siblings again.
wow. So now your children, and you did come forward, Belle, but it was just dropped after that.
That's right.
And Shelley, you didn't. You had to make Maria own the experience. It's actually brilliant, because that's probably the only way that you were able to cope. So if you didn't tell your family because you were, you wanted to save your mom, which I think is pretty interesting. How long did you keep it in, what happened to you? Did you just keep on suppressing it?
So I went on through, my teenage years, and I wound up leaving my mom's house and I moved in with my dad when I was a teenager. And that's when I fully took on the Shelley name, because my mom didn't like the nickname, but I fully took it on at 15. And, like a lot of women who survive sexual abuse, I found attention through flirting inappropriately and touching inappropriately because I didn't know it was inappropriate. I really didn't. And so, you know, when you're in class with some guy and you're, you know, just goofing around, and, you know, if anybody from, you know, if any men I went to high school with see this, I apologize right now, but I can tell you right now that I would goof around with guys and think it was funny. I would just reach over and grab their junk. It was just not that big of a deal to me. You know, to reach over and just touch somebody's penis meant nothing, because everything on me had been touched, everything on me. Like, I had no boundaries.
See, this is one of the biggest tragedies about this, because in my study and understanding the pathology and the profile and everything else, this is not about sex at all, but young
No.
women, girls who have been abused. How can you not mistake it for sex? So it probably really screws you up when you're
Yeah.
a little older and then starting to become
Yeah,
attracted.
because people were telling me what I was doing was inappropriate, and I didn't know. I'm like, what do you
You do it to
mean?
me all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had a miscarriage when I was 18, when I was a senior in high school. And then I got pregnant again 2 years later. And when I found out I was pregnant, you know, I thought, this is my opportunity to be a mom. And so I kept my baby. And then I had another baby. And I was living in New Jersey at the time. And my mom, I was on a phone call with my mom. I was probably in my early 20s. I want to say like 25, 26, 25. And my mom, I was just having a casual conversation with her. And I said, you know, we were just talking about where my brother was during the day. And she said, oh, he took your niece and went down to XYZ's house. And literally in that minute, like, every memory just flooded on me. It was horrible. That broke the bridge, because immediately my brain thought, oh my God, what is he going to do to her? What is he going to do to her? And I started screaming at my mom on the phone, you've got to call him and tell him to leave. I mean, just panic. And so my mom was like, what are you talking about? And so I told her. It was the first time I ever told her out loud. And I'll give my mom a lot of credit here. Instead of saying, you know, that's BS, it's not true, she said, I need to sit with that for a little bit. So instead of being denied, it was, I need to sit with that. And for my mom, that was huge. And she wound up calling me later and saying, she said, I don't want to doubt you. She said, but can you give me anything that would trigger something for me that I could recognize when it would happen? And I knew exactly what to tell her. And I told her, and she got dead silent. And because it was that phrase, it was literally the family joke that this man would say, oh, I have to, his big thing was, I have to take a, you know what? And so he would say, I'd have to take a shit. And so with him saying that, it became the family joke. Every time there was work to be done outside the house, that was his thing. And when I told her that, I said, that was his signal to me, you need to get ready, because that's what's coming. Everybody's leaving. And so my mom immediately knew, oh my God. And so again, she just sat with it and said, I need to process, and then called me the next day and said, I wish I'd known.
Belle, you had a cathartic moment when you had your child. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Shelley has talked a lot about the consequences, right, of behavior, right, when you have childhood sexual trauma. And I was pregnant at 21 myself, and decided to have my baby, and was able to keep her. And I was in therapy at the time. I was
Just go back 1 second, because you had told me something, and I think it could be really powerful. You told your mother you were pregnant and you hoped you'd be having a girl.
Oh yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, I do remember that.
That was wounding to you.
Yes, I was desperate when I was pregnant. I wanted a girl. I was not one of those, can I please just have a healthy baby? I said I wanted a girl, and I kept saying it, and she wanted to know why. And I said, because I don't want to be the mother of a perpetrator. And she said, you'd rather be the mother of a victim?
Now, after your experience, did she know that you had been assaulted at that
She
point?
did. She did. And she
So,
knew she had been assaulted at that point.
oh
So,
wow. Okay, so we're
mm,
talking about a generational thing.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, my mom
mm-hmm,
too.
Oh
mm-hmm.
wow. Okay, so please continue. You had your daughter, and
Yeah, so I had my daughter, and it's interesting. We didn't talk about this, but Shelley bringing it up reminds me that section of my life, having my daughter and having to come to an end in therapy at a time when she's also growing and I'm being subtly triggered in her development.
Mhm.
Um, I renamed myself. I changed my whole entire name. Right before my daughter was born, I was 8 months pregnant in front of the judge, standing there saying, and he didn't even ask me why I want to change my name. He looked at my belly and he just granted it. So,
Okay. You recalled when your daughter was 4 that you had a visceral reaction. Can you share that?
yes, I did. It was the first time in my mothering experience where I was not able to control the trigger part. I had been kind of triggered before when I had to resort to physical discipline.
Mhm.
But I was really triggered when she became 4, right as she was about to turn 4, and I had a mental breakdown. And I was not actually able to care for her for about 3 months because she her body was so small and she was so utterly innocent, and I did not feel like that as a 4-year-old.
So that really did it.
It
You
really
got to
showed me
see,
who I
you
was as a
finally
kid.
were crying for the 4-year-old who got raped before she grew up to have her own child. So as painful as it was such a catharsis because it finally put you in touch enough with the pain to bring out a lot of very positive traits in you,
Yes.
which would lead you toward healing and wellness. So we're at that point now. We're just now getting into your adult life, and then something really big happened to you, Shelley. Can you
Mhm.
talk about can you pick up where you left off?
Um, so the years between when I realized what had happened to me, I went to therapy, I did all kinds of stuff, and I'd only get so far. It just wasn't, I'd only get so far. And I'd been married off and on a few times, and I've been with my last husband because I'm not doing this again, for a few years. And he and I adopted a little girl from China because I couldn't carry physically any more children. So we decided to adopt, and we adopted from China. And her adjustment into our family was beyond difficult. And it pushed me to the literal brink of I couldn't take anymore because she rejected me and my other kids were upset with me. Like, it literally pigeonholed me into a corner, and I was so overwhelmed with everything. And I just got to the whole, I can't do anything right. I might as well just leave. And it was becoming very overwhelming. And so um, I lived in Hightstown, New Jersey at the time. And I would drive through Hightstown, and there was this one specific telephone pole. And I knew that if I hit that telephone pole fast enough without my seatbelt on and turn off the airbag, that I would not survive that crash. And so I had done the research to figure out how to turn off the airbag, and I knew that I could just take off my seatbelt. And I just knew it was going to be better. I knew it was going to be better because anything was better than what I was going through. You know, I had 4 children. I was married for the 4th time, and we were in a really rough spot. Like, it was just, life was very overwhelming. And we got into, I mean, I didn't like to argue in front of my children, but we got into a huge argument. And I was in a t-shirt and underwear. That was all I had on. And I ran out of the house. I grabbed my car keys and I knew that this was the night. And I got in my car and I sat on that street and I looked at that telephone pole. And I was ready. I was ready. And by the grace of God, something stopped me. I don't know what it was, and I don't care. People can call it what they want to call it spirit, call it goddess. I don't care. It was a power much bigger than me that stopped me.
It might have been your 8-year-old self. That's it.
Absolutely. She wanted to survive. She didn't want to die. I did, but she didn't. I completely agree with that. And so I don't know how I got home. I don't. I drove home. I think I did maybe 15 miles an hour to get home. And by the time I got home, my husband knew this was not anything I'd ever done before. He was very concerned. I pull into the driveway and there he stands with my 3 children. The baby was already in bed, but there are my 3 children outside crying. There's my husband freaked out. And I'm in this car. I can barely breathe. I'm just snot running. And he comes over to the car and he begged me. He said, just please, you don't have to roll the window down. Just take the keys out of the ignition, and just walked me through this step-by-step process to get out of the car safely. And so I managed to get out of the car, and he just grabbed me and hugged me. And he said, I love you, and we're going to get through this. He said, but you have to understand that you are not mentally well, and we have to take care of this. And so we got the kids in the house, and I was able to, flip back to being Shelley instead of Maria at that point. And so I was able to put all the pain away. And I said to him, here's the deal. You make all the appointments. You call the doctor, I'll go. And he did. I give this man complete credit. He made the first phone call. He made the appointment. I went to the doctor's office. I said nothing. I mean, zero. I just sat there and said zip. And my husband answered all the questions. And the few that I did answer, I didn't answer as truthfully. And he stood behind me, either shaking his head or doing this so that the doctor would know the truth. And I got put on medication for depression. And fast forward, I got diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. And so I wound up going to a psychiatrist, but that incident triggered me knowing I had to get help. There was no option at that point.
Belle, your incident, your trigger that said, I've got to do this now. I can't just keep on wavering, forgetting. I can't just keep on coping, because it sounds like your experience is different. Your wound is the same. You actually both ended up in the same place, the same destination, and I can't wait to get to that part. But your journeys are such different routes. You said that you wanted to raise your daughter. You were doing everything you could. You were going for therapy prior to getting pregnant. You weren't making a lot of money. You were actually put into the system. Do you want to talk about that, and then how you aged out and then got to this point where you are now a mother, and then had that explosive moment, because that is the turning point, that point of no return. And I'm so glad that both of you ladies had the balls to endure it and go past it. Mm-hmm. I can see and feel the pain now, listening to you. Mm-hmm. So, Belle, please, if you don't mind, bring us to your breaking point, because this is something that can hopefully encourage anybody who's hiding that same secret to have the courage to move forward. So what happened to you?
Sure. And it's, so I went into foster care at age 13. I had run away from home and tried to hitchhike to Houston to see my dad, and had come home, and I guess we were trying to work it out. They had gotten me therapy. And so I was at the therapist office probably 4 or 5 months after the runaway incident happened. And I was it was, I can't even tell you what it was this day. It was like a cleaving of myself in two, is what it felt like. It felt, I refused to go home. I said, I'm not going home. I'm not going to listen to my mother anymore. I'm not going to do these things, because I knew that my mother wasn't, there was something off. She wanted to help, but she was not able to, because there was something off, and I didn't know for the longest time what it was that was off. So I go into foster care. I spend 5 years in foster care, never get reunified, and get an age out at age 18. And I go home to my mother at age 18, and I live in her home for not even 90 days before I'm kicked out of it, just because she can't stand the sight of me. And
Is that because you were getting healthy? I mean, you said that she had been abused as well. So you were actually doing something instead of just sort of ignoring it and letting it continue.
I was in a different place where I was able to work on issues, and she was not. And that was half of it. But the other half of the story will have to, there'll be some more story that has to be told before we can get to the other half of that. So because I'm poor, I can't pursue therapy like I need to as I age out of foster care, right? I'm trying to go to therapy and I'm trying to do my best, and I just can't afford it. And it gets to the point where my therapist is no longer willing to accept that I can't afford it. So I have to end therapy. And, I think you and I talked about, I was so unskilled in just being an adult, a functioning adult, that for me, it was life skills that took precedence. It was like, oh, I have to create stability for my daughter. I have to have housing. I have to have a job. I have to have all of these things. So I've really focused on what is the structure that I can provide her, and what's the parenting that I can do directly, for many years after this. And throughout this time, I have a continuous relationship with my family. And then around age 43, 44, my mother, through some strange circumstances, became homeless and came to live with me. And it was when she came to live with me again that I saw her habits, her daily habits, as a fully functioning, self-actualized adult. I was able to observe it, not through the lens of a child. And I could see why I felt that way in the house. It was because of her treatment of me on a daily basis, the constant manipulation, the constant demands, the constant driving of coping skills that are negative, that are not healthy. And it escalated. Through one incident, she wanted a dog, and we could not have a dog in our apartment because we were already at the limit on pets. And she attempted to manipulate me over months on this dog, and finally went to the doctor and got a doctor's note for this dog, thinking that she could force our apartment complex's rental policies, and I guess. But at that point, I'm 44 years old. I'm seeing this whole picture, and I break, and I literally, the crux of it is, for me, I am her daughter. Why can she not just love me and just let me take care of her? And from deep inside me, and I was on the phone with a precious friend. I was talking about it the next day, and this wail came out of my body, and I've never heard anything like this noise that came out of my body that day. And it was just a naked need for a mom who loved and protected. And you know what I'm saying? And I didn't get that.
And finally believed that you were worthy of it.
Yes, yes. And that it was, and that I wasn't the one that was preventing me from getting it. She was. So we parted ways at that point.
And that's how your early abuse affected your adult relationship with your mom. And did it impact your relationship with men? while you were dating or married? I mean, I look at marriage and dating, you know, like marriage is like a longer date.
I had a little bit of a different experience than Shelley because I was protected in the group home, in the residential treatment facility where I was. And I came out of
you have to leave your home. You have to leave your home to be protected. See, that is tragic.
If I had run around the streets of my neighborhood, I would have been very promiscuous because of the consequences. But because I didn't have access to it, I wasn't in my teenage years. But in my adult years, I was very promiscuous.
So you've had your explosion moment and you've gone on toward wellness. I'd like to bring another guest on, Judge Olga Seelig, who is going to give us a little bit of insight from what she's been listening to. Hi, Olga. Thank you for joining us, Judge Olga. What have you heard this story? Well, just give us a little bit of background about yourself before we start questions.
Okay. So I'm a judge at this point in time, but when I came into these sort of cases, I was an attorney. I worked for one of the courts here in Travis County in Texas, where I took court-appointed cases. So there were folks that couldn't afford an attorney, and their children had been taken away from them. So these stories, I mean, what I've just heard tonight, this was every story.
Really?
Children that weren't protected. And it was either because the parent had been abused themselves and didn't know how to protect their child. They didn't have the resources to go out and get therapy. And it wasn't until somebody else outside of the family that noticed the children something was off. And then there were some that would outcry when they were young. And those would be immediately taken from the parents. And through my representation of those parents, it would come to light how there were cover-ups for boyfriends, uncles, other folks, even husbands. So sadly, that it had to come out like that. And for you two, my God, to have held it so long. But this is very classic.
So as far as legal representation, if a child cannot feel comfortable or believe that they can get help, and their parents aren't going to do it, and there's no outcry from a neighbor or a friend, what can they do? I mean, how can anybody resolve this? Are there any agencies? Are there any legal agencies that are in place that people can appeal to? If somebody's watching this tonight and they know that their child or that the child next door, that they themselves had been abused, what legal channels are there for help?
Well, here there's a CPS system. Most states, all states have one. You can call in anonymously, and if you feel that you don't want to get involved in the situation, and have them investigate a situation where you might think that there is abuse going on.
Okay. Now, as a court-appointed attorney, did you ever have to represent perps? How did you feel about that?
In the sense that the mother would get accused of being a perpetrator because she, knowing what her boyfriend or her husband was doing, she was also labeled the perpetrator in that system. And usually those cases I came to find out that they were also victims themselves.
Now, I got access to a lot of case studies on this topic before we came on the air tonight. And I found that many times a mother was in a pretty hard place, especially if she had no money, if they were a poor family. There would often be a man, either a husband or a boyfriend, that was supporting them. They found out that their child had been raped, which is the only word to use for this. And then there was a choice. Do we starve? Do I get help? Um, what would somebody in that position be able to do? How could they do the right thing for their child and still be able to have a roof over their head, food on the table? What legal recourse? It just sounds like a terrible catch-22. I couldn't imagine being in that position myself. So,
I mean, I had at least one experience like that with a mom who was being raped herself, was threatened with death if she went to the police. So she continued getting raped by the father of her children. And then he would do the same to the kids. As the older one got too old, he'd go down to the next younger, and then the next younger. When he just got down to the bottom, the older ones were behaving in such odd ways that the schools picked up on it. And so that's when the CPS system took the children away. And then my client was able to get therapy. And it was about a year into the therapy, that she was able to gain the trust in me, that she told me everything that had happened to her.
how hard was it for her to trust you?
Very hard. She didn't trust anyone in the system. She thought, the system took away her kids. They were hurting her. She was being called a perp, which often bothered me, because I had a suspicion that something else was going on with her. Because as like Shelley and Belle mentioned, they know something's off with their mom.
Now, Belle, you worked in CPS, and I want to address that, the whole system, the breaks in it, the roadblocks in it. And Judge Olga, you explained something very important, that they don't trust the system. They don't trust CPS because they're called perps. They took their children away. Belle, what was your experience in CPS? What other options would a person in the field have to get this child help besides bringing their mother in as a perpetrator of their harm?
Yeah, was a very troubling story from Judge Olga there. That is not anything I would have ever practiced. I have seen many people in child welfare, CPS, a bureaucratic ecosystem, as we call it, who would practice that way. It is really dependent on who you get, how well trained they are, how seriously they take their job, and whether or not it's a job or they want to actually do some good with it. For some people, it is just a job and they're not going to give very much. But then for other people, they're very motivated to help, like myself. I can remember a story. It's child sex abuse, but it was a neighbor who did it. And this was I got the report that there were bruises on the teenager's arm, and that mom had said she put him there. That's what she told the school. So I go to the home and I talk to mom, and mom says, yeah, I put those bruises on her arm. And I am shocked. I'm like, Mom, please don't be telling me this stuff, because this is going to lead to some escalation. Let me go and talk to your daughter. And so I go and talk to her daughter. I look at the bruises. They're very bad bruises. They're wraparound belt bruises is what we call them. And, one of the things that has been very cathartic for me in my work, especially in my field practice, is the opportunity to use my story just a little bit to nudge a child or a parent in greater understanding, and to get them to open up to me a little more. And so this girl was just very, very scared. And so I just talked to her a little bit about working in CPS and doing that, because I was a foster kid and I wanted to help other kids. And that was really, you know, the whole reason I was there was just to get her story. And she broke open for the first time since the incident happened. To about 72 hours before that, she had been lured to an abandoned house, again with the abandoned houses, by a neighbor, and she'd been kept there for 24 hours and repeatedly raped. And her mother thought she had spent the night running the streets. And when she got home, she gave her a beating. But that is not where the bruises came from. The bruises came from the perpetrator threatening her 2 days later about telling. So, yeah.
Continue. I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Finish saying what you were saying.
I'm able to go to mom at that point and say, Mom, I need you to sit down because I'm going to break some really bad news to you. And I need you to be ready for this. And so she sits down and I tell her what's happened to her daughter. And I can see on her face the appropriate reaction breaking, which is horror and indignity and anger and protection for her daughter's unfolding on her face. And she immediately starts talking about therapy. We did not have to open a case in that case because mom was willing to do what she needed to do. And I knew the resources to connect her to in the community. We could go ahead and tag the perpetrator for the crime that he did in our civil system, but we didn't have to bring her through the system. She could deal with her trauma in her family way because they were responding appropriately.
Shelley, trust. When, what point did you realize that anyone would have to convince you that you had to trust someone that you might have felt you shouldn't? I mean, people have trust issues with the system, justifiably. We heard a little bit about why tonight. Judge Olga was able to convince her client to trust the system. Who did you trust? You had to trust someone other than yourself. So you just...
I did not.
So how did you go about your healing?
Trust was really, really hard. I didn't trust anybody. To me, everybody was going to hurt me. It was a matter of what level of hurt was acceptable. And that's literally how I lived my life. Well, you hurt me the least, so you're probably the best person to be around. And so that's what I went through with my husband. And that's why we're still together 22, almost 23 years later. It's not been easy for him to be the spouse of a survivor of childhood sexual abuse because I have triggers. There are certain ways that he can't touch me. There are certain things that he cannot do because it will immediately, and I don't care how much integration and healing I've done through this journey, certain ways you touch me, it's just a violent reaction. And so it's through, I finally, through, taking the bipolar medication, was able to get the rage under control because I was either really, really calm and passive or really, really mad. There was like no in between for me. And obviously we know where the rage comes from. It was the very angry little girl who wanted to be heard, and you're not going to shut me up anymore. And so at some point I eventually had someone start talking to me about, using aromatherapy for things. And, it was my best friend and my daughter, like, Mommy, you need to use aromatherapy. And I thought she was a hippie chick and I made fun of her. But eventually what happened was I became, a certified aromatherapist and realized that essential oils would help me to stay calm and they helped me to do certain things. And then I was able to adjust my medication back. And then I discovered meditation and how wonderful meditation was, to learn to become present in my body, to learn that it was safe to be in my body. Being, as a survivor, being present in your body is really hard.
Oh, yeah.
Because that means that I have to know that I'm safe. And that's a huge thing for me. Like I still work through some of that.
Did you feel that you were the only person who could keep you safe, or are you...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is really scary when you've been wounded so deeply. And
yes. Yeah. I didn't trust anybody to keep me safe. It was just me. And that was very hard for my husband to deal with because my husband's this, very masculine man from Long Island. He's a mechanic. He worked for the city of New York, big guy. And his job is to protect, And my job was to push him away because I could do it myself. Thank you very much. So we had some clashing going on there.
I want to get into a dialogue between Judge Olga and both of you ladies about the flaws in the system and what could be done. But we do have a question, and it is from Ellie's mom. Ellie's mom, if you're still with us, can you just say something in chat? Because I would love for you to come on screen if you like. And if not, I can read your question. But I'd like to give you a minute. Well, I'll read it, but I would like you to, if you're comfortable having a dialogue. It says, I'm not a victim, but I'm a retired teacher who had students disclose to me. Once one child chooses you, word gets out you're a good person to tell. I let my students know I was a mandatory reporter, but it's not always as easy as a teacher to get the system to respond. What could be done to make that easier? Which is exactly where I wanted to go. Not only the protocol in schools, but also CPS. Judge Olga, you're the legal expert. What do we got going here?
I was going to say that was one of the persons that usually gets tagged by the student or the child, who they're going to make that first outcry to. Teachers, you have to make the kids safe, feel safe to tell you, and gain their confidence in that you're not going to do something that's going to hurt them any further. In other words, hurting their family, the father may go to jail or their uncle may go to jail, stuff like that. So that the teachers need some training in how to take these outcries so they can send them on to CPS. And then when they come into the legal system, to us, they're not being attacked as being not credible, which often happens.
Ellie's mom just announced she's here. I would love for her to come on camera. Ellie's mom, please. You just type something, so type again. We can do audio or video. And if you don't want to, you can say that. But I would really rather have you have the opportunity to follow up on your question and get any other information that you think would be helpful to pass along.
I love what Judge Olga said about educating the teachers. And I really wish that there was more education for people in recognizing behavioral changes in children. Because if anybody had ever really paid attention to my behavior, they would have known something was wrong. I was such a happy-go-lucky, outgoing kid before the abuse. And once the abuse started, I was very withdrawn. I didn't talk. I didn't want to play with anybody because I didn't want to risk blabbing. So there was this complete change in my personality. But, my mom, bless her, was a single mom trying to raise 3 kids, making minimum wage in the 70s. It was not easy for her, but nobody else noticed either. Not grandparents, not anybody else in the family. And if they noticed, they just chose not to say anything. So we need to find a way all over the country where it's okay to talk, because we do this whole thing where we have to hide. Here's the rug, let's put it underneath there. And that's why nobody wants to talk. So it's difficult when you start to see these change in behaviors, so who do you tell and who is it safe to tell?
Okay.
That's where I think that the system needs to put everybody on notice and be out looking for these signs. There were just too many times in my cases. I mean, just the things that you all said, I heard that in so many cases. As a judge now, I get to see the affidavits that come in from law enforcement as to the accused. And these are all signs that should have been caught way sooner than they ever were.
So what was the holdup? How did it, is it just people afraid to come forward, or are there things inside the system? Belle, you work in CPS. I don't know anybody who works in education, but are there penalties for, do the bureaucrats in those systems discourage people from coming forward? Are teachers discouraged from going forward? Is there
That's a
liability? I mean, it just sounds.
there's not liability to my understanding. I'm not an attorney.
Yeah.
I can't, that's not legal advice, but my understanding is that there's not liability because of qualified immunity. And so, but here is the many of the problems. Well, first of all, schools do a lot better job than they used to do. They now have programs that they go into schools at least once a year. At least they were doing that pre-COVID, where they're talking about it used to be called good touch, bad touch. Now it's safe touch. And they're giving those children the opportunity. They're talking about this being something that can happen to children. And if it's happening to you or someone you know, you should talk to your teacher about that or someone that you trust at the school. And we get a rush of reports at that point. And that is a really good thing, except that CPS workers hate it because they get a lot of old reports. Yes. And so because in a learning environment, people are making connections so fast, right? So these kids, some of these kids who've been through a situation where they've been sexually abused, come through our system, had the situation addressed, will just spontaneously disclose again. And we have to assess every single report that comes through. So that's sort of how a good idea doesn't work sometimes, right? Because of the ethics of the people working in the field and how overworked they are. Because do understand, these people should not be getting as many cases as they're getting. And there's so much funding problems in CPS that
Is it
cause them
funding
over.
problems, or are funds reallocated to go somewhere where they shouldn't be, leaving less to process those?
Well, I've done it in 2 states, and in Indiana, they wasted a whole lot of money doing a whole lot of useless stuff. And here in South Carolina, they're in a big fight with their legislature. They haven't raised their funding in over 5 years. So, which is ridiculous, right? So they're having to do things on a real shoestring budget here. So that's one thing I know for myself. If there had been a good touch, bad touch, safe touch program in my school, I might have disclosed.
Okay.
Because I was having memories. I remembered what happened to me all the way up until I'm about 8. So when I go into kindergarten at 5, I would have definitely probably disclosed at that point, and maybe I wouldn't have gone into foster care later on.
Right.
So the program is good despite the hassle that it gives. But the other thing that we really need to do is talk frankly about this. People are very uncomfortable with this topic. And
here we are.
I am sitting here in this conversation checking out on occasion because it's so uncomfortable for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have somebody who's not uncomfortable. We have a guest on screen. It's Deanne. Deanne, you have a question? Is there someone that you want to talk to, or do you have comments? What's going on?
I had no idea what tonight's session was because I was so caught up in life. I just got your text earlier in the week and I was like, yeah, I'll join. And then I started listening, and it was like perfect timing because my mother came over today and she mentioned my uncle's name, and he's the one that molested me when I was maybe 5. I think 5. I can't remember. And she mentioned his name, and I've probably told her for the past 10 years to not ever mention his name, but she just brought him up. And I'm sitting there quiet, trying to just not even look at her because she keeps bringing him up, and it's like nothing. And Anthony,
Did you tell her? Did you tell her what he did to you?
Yes, I had to tell her because when I was engaged almost 10 years ago, I had to tell my mother why I couldn't invite my uncle. So I wasn't going to tell anybody anything. My husband obviously knew everything. I just wanted to keep it to myself, but she made a photocopy of our invite and she sent it to him without my knowledge. So I had to tell her why I didn't want him there. and it was just nothing. Like it was just like, oh, this didn't happen.
So she denied it. She
Yeah,
would
she
not
denied
believe you.
Mhm. Yeah. And then she Facebook messaged him and asked him if something happened, and he said no. And then he actually Facebook messaged me, and I immediately blocked him because I wasn't going to deal with that. And then it was like a few weeks later, she was like, oh, but he told me he only like touched your boob. And even that was like, it was
Wait
such
a
a
minute.
nonchalant thing that my mother said.
Hold on. I'm a mother, and my brother raped my daughter, but I'm going to tell her, oh, he only grabbed your tits. No,
Yeah.
no.
Deanna, can I give you a big hug? What an awful experience throughout. That's awful. I'm so sorry.
Well, and that's a
Yeah.
re-victimization, and we live through that kind of stuff all the time, and it just perpetuates the I can't trust you.
That's right. My uncle contacted me on Facebook too, many years after the fact, and
they
crushed
deny
me.
it
It crushed
too.
me.
And he
Yeah.
was like, I remember him saying, your mother told me some things. He didn't say what. He literally said some things. And those aren't true. What are you talking about? I was so infuriated with reading those words that I just blocked him. And I was like, there's nothing I could even say, or would I want to say. He's dead now. But
Oh, good. Oh, good.
he is
I
dead.
was
Yes.
raised that, when somebody dies, they never talk about the bad they've done, only the good, and your uncle's dead. Good. That's where I'm at with that.
See, my
What-
perpetrator is still alive, which is why I don't release his name.
You want me to
Well,
beat him up?
someone told me that once you get married, you heal a little bit. Once you get pregnant, you heal a little bit. And then once your perpetrator dies, you fully heal. I'm at that point because I got married. I had a kid. I had a daughter, and I want it. Same with you. Like I wanted a daughter. Like my first pregnancy wound up in miscarriage, and it was a boy. And I remember the feeling of like I was kind of guilty. Like I felt kind of guilty because I was actually happy that I got to redo and try for a girl, which I feel bad thinking about that. But I got my girl, and all I wanted was like for her to get like the attention that I, and the love and the affection, all that stuff that I didn't get.
And the
And she's
protection.
kicking in the door right now.
Yeah, and the protection, exactly. And that's what I
That's
did with my kids. I protected them probably too much. I might have been a helicopter mom.
Well, I think we can forgive ourselves any flaws because just living through this is when it happens at such a young age, it frames your whole life. And there is going to be a lot of mistakes that are made because of that. And every child deserves to be protected. You should have been protected.
Yeah, and it's kind of like we just swept it under the rug type of thing. My mother, I don't like, she heard my side, but it was like nothing after that. And to this day, even to this day, like literally this afternoon, she brought him up. She brings him up during holidays, prior to his death, even after his death. I just sit there and I go, what?
So, Deanne, have you taken any steps to heal yourself, to be able to become a survivor, somebody who, or are you still grappling with it? I mean, how do you cope? Have you resolved it at all?
I don't think I am like healed. I don't like, to me, it's almost like, I don't want to call myself a survivor either, because then I feel like it's a crutch, or I think, but that could be a coping mechanism. Like, I don't want to be a victim, like I kind of put like a hard, and you know me, I kind of put like this hard exterior on. So I don't want to be called those things. But you guys said so many things that were exact to my situation that I was like, I have to come on here and talk about my.
I'm glad you did, and I would like you to come on a little later in the broadcast, because the next part of the story that these ladies have is what they have done to ensure that other people will have the safety that they didn't have. But we have a question for Judge Olga from Melee. If you are still in chat, please come on screen. And she actually just texted me a little while ago on, let me just, let me come on camera. I would love for her to come on camera because it's a really good question. So I will start reading it for you. It says, question for Judge Olga. How educated are judges in child sexual abuse cases within the family? And what are the protective protocols for the child if the perpetrator is the father of the child demanding father's rights of visitation? Wow.
Well, we're going to have to parse that question out.
Okay.
Okay. So break it down for the first question.
Okay. How educated are judges in child sexual abuse cases within the family? And what are the, okay. So
How educated? We're not.
Well, I just invited her on screen. I hope she'll come on and be able to give you that information. But it sounds like that first part of that question is actually a comment on the second part. The protective protocols for the child if the perpetrator is the father of the child demanding rights of visitation. So basically a father has abused his own child and now using his leverage as father for visitation to spend more time with that child. What can be done about that? Okay. Scott said that she cannot come on. So you're going to have to.
Well, as a judge, usually the judge is only going to know what's in a case or that comes forward to them. Because remember, we're supposed to be the neutral person in this courtroom.
How hard is
that? So we're not going to educate ourselves beforehand. Okay. That is the CPS's role. And they're the advocates. They have the district attorney that usually comes in to advocate. And so they're the ones that are very well versed in that area. Usually they're specializing in that area, so they're placed just to take those kind of cases. Then you have the social worker who has more information that they can educate the judge, especially on that particular case, that type of case. But for the judge, we're there to listen and hear it and make our judgment based on what we've heard, what the facts are. And so to say that we go educate ourselves first, we don't do that. Now there are in certain jurisdictions, they take only certain types of cases. In our jurisdiction, we have a judge that listens to the CPS cases. And that court is the only one that does it. So yes, by virtue of having that court assigned to you, you're going to learn more and more about these types of cases.
So in order to fulfill your role as a judge honorably, has there ever been a time when someone just had the wrong attorney you knew in your bones that this happened, but the attorney didn't provide enough discovery or evidence to not convince you, but to give you the leverage to rule? That must be a really difficult position to be in if that's the case. Did anything like that ever happen, and how do you handle that?
No, let me just make it clear. I've not been a judge of that kind of court.
Okay.
So I don't take those cases. What I used to do, I was the advocate for the parents who had their children removed on that type of situation.
And you did that as a judge or as an attorney?
That was as an attorney.
Okay. So then I guess there's no way to, so now that we understand that you're, it must be very difficult sometimes being a judge in the cases that you do hear when an attorney is not doing a thorough enough job presenting you evidence to rule on. How hard is it for you to remain in that neutral space? Is it something that you had to work up the skill to do, or is it just sort of part of your education when you were in law school and aspiring to be a judge?
I think, as a judge, you really do have to only listen to what you have in front of you in court.
Right.
So if the advocates for either side aren't providing you with what you need, you can't bring in your own evidence, your own knowledge to
No,
it.
but is there anything that you can do? Can you refer it somewhere else? No.
No, there's really not a way to do that. I mean, usually CPS and the district attorney's office, they're ready.
Mhm.
They do have the background, they do have the experience in those types of cases, so they are prepared. Now, whether the other side is prepared or not, that's a different question, because a lot of times these are parents who don't have resources to go out and hire their own attorneys. They're given court-appointed attorneys, and that's a hit and miss.
Mhm.
There's some that are really good, there's some that are not, and then there's the ones in between.
And
So-
I think sometimes it depends a lot on jurisdiction, because I've worked in 2 different states, and in one state we did have specialized sex abuse units, and in the other state we don't. Surprisingly, the state where we do not have dedicated child sex workers, the police do a better job of getting convictions in child sex abuse cases.
Wow.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's wonderful.
Mhm. They're very serious about that here in South Carolina.
So it seems from listening that the biggest problem is within the system for a child. You have to trust the system, but there have been so many instances where it's almost impossible. Judge Olga, what would you recommend? What changes would you recommend be implemented or pursued in order to make the system work better for the victims?
More money to the system.
Okay, but
That's that's a very basic problem. They don't get enough funding
Mhm.
from the state. If they were getting paid, if you had social workers who were getting paid what their worth
Mhm.
is, and these are really difficult cases for social workers to take on.
Absolutely.
They're
There's not enough
overburdened.
of them.
Too
There's
many
not enough.
cases in the caseload. They just don't have enough time to work the cases the way it should. And that all comes back to the funding of the child welfare services.
So, Belle and Shelley, what have you done since you confronted your horrible experience and committed yourself? How have you healed yourself, and are you doing anything? What are you doing to help other people? Are you getting the word out there? Shelley, what have you been up to?
So, about 4 or 5 years ago, my life completely changed. I started doing meditation, and I started doing things in a more holistic manner. Through all of that, I was able to embrace my ability as a psychic medium. And through meditation and through being able to talk to spirit and doing past life regressions, I understand why everything happened to me in this lifetime the way that it happened. I get it. So I was able to embrace it. And what I do now is spirit was very clear with me and said, you have to tell your story. You have to talk about this. And I said, but I'm going to lose my family. And they said,
So what?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so and so I do that. So a lot of my clients that I have come in for readings. I do wind up getting a lot of people on the other side who have apologies to deliver.
Oh, wow.
And it is amazing to me to feel the regret coming off of the crossed over soul and being able to deliver that apology. I'm honored to be a channel for that, to give a voice to this and watch these women sit in front of me and cry because it's the one thing that they always wanted to hear, which was, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. And it doesn't instantly repair everything.
No.
But it's a beautiful gift to them that they wouldn't have gotten any other way. And so Spirit was very clear that my business was to be geared towards that. So I have become a certified women's circle facilitator. So I facilitate circles for women.
Deanne,
And
are you listening?
it deals with all trauma, not just, sexual abuse trauma, but I am going to start doing some circles specifically for women geared towards that. But this is all about how women can, because here's the thing, we sit in a place of victimization for so long that we wind up hurting other people. And at some point, we have to take responsibility for that damage. And that's a really hard place to come from, because all you want to do is say, well, but they hurt me. They hurt me. Yes, but that in turn changed you, and you became a perpetrator to somebody else, whether you meant to or not.
Wow.
And so I help walk them through that, where they can recognize that their behavior has caused pain to someone else as well. And that's really hard for me to say, oh, I've done this or I've done that. I was a huge control freak for many, many years because I needed to control everything about my environment. Surprise birthday parties were a no-no. Don't do it, because anytime I was surprised, I was molested. So surprises don't bode well for me. And so, that's literally what I do. And sooner rather than later, I will have a wellness center. Right now I have a day job, but at night I do the mediumship, and I teach mediumship, and I teach these, I hold these women's circles, and I hold this sacred space for women to come in and find other like-minded women where they can all break down together and rebuild themselves together and show up more authentically and sovereign in their lives. It's beautiful. They find their voice.
So if someone hearing this wants to investigate what you have, if they want to be part of that community, how would they be? Is there a screening process? How would they get a hold of you? How would
my women's circles, I only have 10 women in each circle, and I need to start releasing the circles again. They can find me on my website, which I haven't officially launched, so it's still not perfect, but I'll put it out there anyway. It is Maria Leggett. Okay. Yeah, it's published.
Okay, good.
I just haven't told anybody about it until now, so surprise. It's marialeggettunveiled.com. And on there, my circles will be listed. My classes that I teach are on there will be listed. So there'll be meditation classes and all different kinds of things, because that's how I'm able to help women moving forward, is to hold space for them, because that was not what happened for me. And the one thing that I want everybody to take away from this more than anything is, if you're watching this and you've been through, I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, mine wasn't as bad as yours. It doesn't matter. If it happened to you one time, or if it happened to you for 10 times, or if it happened for 20 years, it doesn't matter. It's all bad. And so, we get taught growing up to compare ourselves to each other. Women learn growing up, compare yourselves. Stop the comparison. It doesn't matter. You were damaged. Now we need to start to work with that so we can integrate the pain and become who you're supposed to be. Don't let it decide, right? That's what I tell everybody. What happened to me may have formed who I am, but by God, it doesn't get to decide who I am.
It doesn't define
I get
you.
to
It is
decide.
not your, it is not your identity. But what's interesting is that I get a lot of people that have come to me and well, the same thing. Well, it wasn't as bad as what happened to you. And my answer is, you know what? It was the worst thing in the world for you. So whether the worst thing in your world was a hangnail or that, or what I went through, because I had a really insane illness. I mean, we'll get into that in some other show, but comparison, it's almost the way I think of trying not to confront the fact that you now have to work at healing. Well, it wasn't as bad as yours, so I can skate for a little while longer. And it might be that. It might be a coping mechanism or a defense mechanism. But whether it's a hangnail or your house got blown up, it's the worst thing that happened. And it's just it's painful. So to reach you, they would go to Maria Leggett. Well, you want to write it in chat? Write it in chat.
Sure.
Type it in chat.
Sure.
Like, who you are.
I'll throw it in. So the one thing that I can say, and I know that our legal services, I know that they need to have more money put into them. And I don't disagree that that would make a huge difference. We need to have a mindset change as a country, and it's free. It's free. Stop
just say
making
that, Shelley.
child abuse taboo. Stop making sexual abuse on a child taboo, because you're keeping it quiet. You're making that child not say anything. If we change the mindset of America and we change the adults, and if we can put our BS to the side and let some child come and say, this is what's happening to me. And nobody is saying you have to immediately accuse somebody and decapitate them. What we're saying is that child needs to be heard. Let their voice be heard.
They need to know that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, we make it so taboo.
Have a place where they feel safe. And and the system has to now look outside the box that they're in and look to places like this that Shelley's willing to offer a safe place to speak. Because that's all these people really ever wanted. When my clients would finally divulge what had happened, it was because they felt safe with me. They didn't necessarily want me to share it with anyone else, but they felt safe with me. So I commend you, Shelley and Belle. If you can work on that, that would be awesome, because these kind of forums are what these people need.
Yes, I would love to work on that.
And you are working in CPS right now, right? Is that, are you able to change it from the inside out?
It is a struggle. I'm going to acknowledge. But I will say this, I'm coming late to this. I've worked in child welfare for 8 years, and it's only in the last 2 that I have stopped whispering my way through the system.
Ah, okay.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
And I think maybe if we can bring the private sector in, if you can't get funding through your municipalities or federal funding, maybe there's a partnership that can be done with the private sector. There are people that will raise money. There are people that have been touched. Judge Olga was telling me about one in our conversation last evening when we were kind of going through our format. And it's a brilliant idea, because people can raise an awful lot of money and then earmark it for that and then work hand in hand with the system. We have another guest, Annie Fox. Are you still with us, or did you disappear? You're there. Hey, baby.
Hi, Anthony.
How are you?
First,
Hi.
Anthony, thank you so much for tonight's show. Ladies, thank you all for being here. Took courage from both of you, and thank you for being here, and I'm sorry you went through that. I also am a survivor and a warrior. And have either of you did EMDR therapy? I had no memories from the ages of 5 to 15. In fact, I had to move clear across country before a therapist told me I had PTSD.
My sister did it. I did not, but my sister did it much later in her life. And she did it because she was looking deeper at the memories. She was 9. I was 4, and she was 9 when our abuse started. So she found it very effective. Yes. So she was able to pull out some recollections that mean something to her. And they don't mean that much to me, because I think you're very just developmentally different when you're 4 and when you're 9. But it helped her a great deal. Did it help you, Anne?
Immensely. I had no clue what was the matter with me, and got told I had high anxiety, whatever, from back east. And out here, I talk too fast for everybody. And it's just, that's a back east thing. Anthony knows that. And finally, I started in the CODA group, Codependence Anonymous, and somebody was crying. And every time she cried, I cried. And she knew what happened to me, but I still did not know. And then I got diagnosed with PTSD. And somebody read the book EMDR. I grabbed that book from them and went to my therapist, and we both said it at the exact same time, EMDR. And that brought out all the memories from 5 to 15. So I could literally sit here, not cry, and think it happened to somebody else because I saw it on a screen. My father was be very brief because this is not about me, but to give you some feedback. My father was a raging alcoholic, pedophile, hoarder, schizophrenic. And I found his body dead when I was 30. He was dead for 2 whole months. And I had no memories of this until like 42 about the child abuse. I heard and that's when he died, I found out he had molested my uncle, who was 18 years older than me, my aunt, who was 20 years older than me. And I'm sure he molested my cousin that overdosed at the age of 46. She was my oldest cousin, because I have a picture of her sitting on his lap.
That is something that we don't talk about, and we should. Family victimization.
That was Melee's question. Yeah. How to deal with that. And
when you have one person who's in charge of perpetrating against multiple family members, yes, it is a problem. And that was my dad's experience with my paternal grandfather on the child abuse side, is that he was also schizophrenic, chained to the bed because his behavior was so aggressive and violent. And
it's very common in big families. It's easy to hide.
That's right. And because everyone is so siloed by the aggression. The aggression is intended to shut people down, and it does shut people down.
I was, the only memory I had was when I was 5, and that's when I locked him out of my bedroom door. And I remember him breaking the door down, and then the next thing I remembered was sleeping with my mother, who I had to sleep in bed with from 5 to 15, because I told her I was not sleeping in there alone. But she always had me wake him up for work. Again,
listen to this voice of self-protection. I hear that in your story and in Shelley's story. Children seeking to protect themselves, right? And the adults should be the ones doing that.
And just like Shelley, I had to be home. If I was going to a relative's house, because I'm an only child, I would get sick, stomach aches constantly. I still suffer from stomach aches. And because I knew I had to be home to protect my mother, because I didn't know if he was going to kill her, but then I didn't know if she was going to kill him. She's another story. So the physical abuse to perpetuate with her. However, and the EMDR was amazing for me. It brought out all the memories that I did not have, and it put them in a safe spot. So I could literally usually I would cry, but after the EMDR, after that started, it's like it's on a TV screen. It's over there. And I've helped and wrote about a lot of this and had it online for other people that have been through this. I compared my life to a book called The Beautiful Mind, Living with a Schizophrenic.
Oh, yeah.
But Shelley, I just related so much to what you said. Thank you so much for telling your story.
Thank you, Annie, for sharing yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wish we could afford that therapy in child welfare. It would be really nice.
So now that we've identified the problems in the system, and it does have to do with funding, and it does have to do with cooperation, what does anybody think we can do to resolve that? Who do we lobby? How do we get it? How do we raise awareness about this need in our system in order to get everyday people to start calling their elected officials to, I don't know the first way to go about it. Who has an idea on how to do that?
Well, for myself, one of the projects that I'm working on internally in a child welfare system is child welfare, the social workers who populate this field do a pretty good job with the compassion and empathy that Judge Olga talked about that is necessary in this process. They didn't used to, but they're doing a much better job today than they were. But I have a vision. There are, within any given child welfare agency, there are tons of former foster kids who were helped, who go back into that system to work. Many of them do not last because either they haven't dealt with their trauma or because they get shut down by professionals who don't want to hear about former foster kids working in their ranks, which is ridiculous. Those people should be promoted to leadership immediately. And they're not. They're shut down a whole lot. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is make it okay to talk about being a foster kid and surviving these things and networking with others. I've actually submitted a proposal to the Casey family programs to try to get a whole national network of former foster kids working in child welfare so that they can tell the agencies from the professional standpoint and from the lived experience standpoint, this is how we should do it. These are the ideas that worked in my case or what could work in the future. And I'm waiting to hear back on that. And I'm hoping, hoping.
Yeah. Do you also?
I think so. I think that's a good idea, Belle. because oftentimes, like, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, it was just all these survivors that banded together and started getting the word out. And that's how the legislature started changing laws, made it more of a penalty as successive drunk driving occurred with these offenders.
Mhm.
Same with victims advocacy for domestic abuse. There has to be something for sexual abuse survivors, and we haven't seen that yet. And I think now
Yes.
with platforms that we have online, it's open for us to get this out, so that way people like Shelley can be somebody that we will go to, that
Mhm.
where they could feel safe. This is something that is open to us now that we never had in the past.
Right.
I
So-
agree. I would love to be able to send clients to Shelley, right? Because you talked about that generational pattern. So when we have a child victim identified and we get the family story, is that if the family story includes that the mother or father was a victim, they should be offered those trauma services. And it should be any kind of services that they feel like would help them that are evidence-based. So.
Belle, within the system that you work in, would you be able to use Shelley or someone like her as a resource?
No, I cannot, but a
Why
parent
not?
can. Because, well, first of all, in South Carolina, they don't have uniform services. South Carolina is a little bit of a different case because they're trying to bring up their child welfare system from a very substandard point of view.
Okay.
The director characterizes them as being 10 years behind the time. So, and I think that's probably accurate. So it's a little difficult to do that here. But I do think that other states can do it, and I think it can be done here. Most states they do contract services where they'll sign up a provider and then they have a list of providers that the services are
Well,
available.
that's kind of, yeah. So she
Yeah.
can, so someone,
Shelley could.
so she
if
can do that. Because Shelley, you do this online, it's virtual, so you don't have to live
Mhm.
where you are. That would be really great if you can manage to get on a list like that in several places. I mean,
Mhm.
and just people knowing that it's available lets them know that this is not being swept under the rug any longer, that it's all out there now, it's on the table, and there are people in the private sector who are willing to step forward and help where you don't have the funding or the interest in developing the personnel, because we all know what happens in a bureaucracy, and there's people that just put a stick in the spokes of everything because they have their own interests. But knowing that you can be on a roster that people can discover if they want to, and the fact that you do work virtually could be a big help. So I hope you guys can work something out about that. It would be
Yeah.
And even getting
great.
onto the list of the parent attorneys, to
Okay.
where they had litems for all those people that are working. As one of the court-appointed attorneys, I would have sent my own client to you. I didn't have any parameters, or nobody was going to say, "Oh, you can't send your client to get rehab somewhere." I could have sent them on my own.
That's
So-
right.
So how then would we let these ad litem attorneys and court-appointed attorneys know that these resources are available? Is there somebody in the middle that can actually say that we have people in the private sector? I know that I was in court recently and there was someone ahead of me that had some issues. It was rent court. I was actually advocating for a senior who was terrified to go to court. I'm a senior, but they didn't have balls. And the judge gave them, I think he had his clerk give them some paperwork, and there were several agencies, Catholic Charities, things that had nothing to do with law enforcement or the legal system in New York, but they were able to take other charities and other organizations that would be helpful to that person in order to meet their obligation. Can Shelley's work be included in something like that? I have no idea what the procedures would be if they vary from state to state.
So it's going to depend on jurisdiction. And the development, again, the professional development of the person, because I think a lot of people whose lives are touched by this kind of keep a list of resources as they develop them. The states that do paid services have databases. but
Mhm.
they also have additional lists of people that if the agency is not going to provide the services and the parents want to pursue the services, we
Mhm.
can give them a list. So I would suggest maybe talking to whatever town you live in, they have a CPS office. I would start with their director. How can we team to help parents? Because addressing the child's trauma of sex abuse when it happened because there's previous sex abuse is only half the picture. We also need to help the parents recover from that trauma so that they
Oh,
can
wow.
safely protect their children in the future.
Absolutely.
And Shelley, would you be interested in training people in other jurisdictions to be able to do what you do? That might be something interesting to look into. I'm sure you have a method. It obviously works because you've been in existence for a while and you've been helping people. So
And I
this
want to
could be,
come to one.
well,
I would love to have you.
you guys should connect. But
Yeah.
it might be something interesting. I mean, there may be somebody who wants to do some good, some philanthropic person with some time on their hands, open up a 501c3, do a really cool 30-second ad on cable TV, every kind of, just get it out there for people to see. And then that kind of awareness can create pressure on local agencies to incorporate this modality into their services as someone, an adjunct that would be available by the choice of the person. But at least people will know that it exists because nobody wants to touch this. They just sort of lump it in with child abuse in general. And being an abused child, that really sucks. But if this happened to me, I don't know. You're talking about such a delicate part of your psyche that's been destroyed at such a tender age, and I'm just privileged to know you ladies who have worked so hard for your own healing, and Judge Olga, who understands what's going on here and has some pretty brilliant ideas. And don't let a pretty face. She will cut you. She will not back down.
I almost moved to Austin and I regret it now. I want to work with you.
Well,
We'd welcome you back.
the fact that our entire world now since COVID is all virtual, there may be something that can be done on the internet that can be accessed by many people who can then pressure their local governments, their local municipalities, bring the awareness to their towns. Because, Belle, you and I were on the phone during prep, and what did you say? Every fourth house?
Yeah, about every third or fourth house. In some neighborhoods, you are seeing children are sexually victimized every night. It depends on the history of families. We know socioeconomically that a lot of poor families have struggled over generations with self-regulation, behavior, conduct, and you have layers of trauma that are built in from that, and that has to be unpacked for the family to be able to embrace a new and healthier mindset and a way to protect their children and reorient them on that, because they're not protecting them, not because they don't want to, but because their coping skills are interfering with it 9 times out of 10. So if we can address their trauma, they become better protectors of their own children. This is talking about the parents who have observed it, not the ones who have done it. It's a little different there, but even there, I mean,
but I'm sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to an undereducated single mother who has to keep a roof over her children's head and food on the table. What do you do? I mean,
you get a boyfriend a lot of times.
We know what the right thing to do is, but I'm very sympathetic to people in those circumstances. And there has to be another advocacy group. There has to be someone that they can go to that can get them through that interim period. Because, sure, you can go to social services and get on welfare and everything else, but that takes forever. And that's still not enough to feed your child, educate them, take care of your own needs. So I'm not so quick to condemn these mothers. There is a better choice than sweeping it under the rug and letting it continue, but there's nothing in place for them to go to. And that's where I think the private sector can partner.
I agree.
Absolutely. And I think we've got Instagram, Facebook, everybody's willing to talk about
Right.
things like politics. Why don't we start talking about this?
About this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean, to me, it is the brave, um, courageous conversations that we do unflinchingly, where we do things like we've done here today. We don't say, "Oh, this is just child sex abuse." No, it's child rape. It's,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
it's child, like, being honest about the details, and that has to come from the survivors of it, so that people know, because people automatically shut down when the topic is brought up. They're
Mhm.
so
They
traumatized
get
by the,
squeamish.
yeah,
I've
they
had
get
more
squeamish.
than one friend approach me today. I saw a very dear friend of mine on the street, um, and she said, "Oh, I got your email," and she says, "But it's just something I don't know if I can watch that. It
Mhm.
might be." It's like,
Yeah.
well, that's exactly
Mhm.
why you need to.
That's
It
right.
needs to be brought out into the open. It needs to be a topic of conversation that's not going to make anybody squeamish or nervous. I suspect she may have had some issues or know someone that um, had been violated, and I do understand the not wanting to go near it. But you ladies, Shelley and Belle, what suppressing it did. It eventually
Mhm.
blew up, and you were strong enough and courageous enough to meet it head on and say, I'm going to take this and make it work for me. I'm going to have to get past this. You may have had to do it for your children, because sometimes it's easier to do something for your child than it is for yourself. You want to protect your child because you've already been unprotected, and look how you turned out. But now you turn into that mom who does it for another reason. And there are people who are going to blow up. It's like being a ticking time bomb. And they
Yeah.
need to know that it is not uncommon. It is
Mhm.
much more common than you think. It happens to so many more people than you know. And the only reason why you don't know is that nobody's talking about it. So that's why I was inspired to have this live stream tonight. And that's why I couldn't be happier to have all three of you strong, fabulous women together talking about solutions, not just it's terrible. They all need to go to jail. No, no, no. You've actually gone beyond. You're healing other people with the same wound that you couldn't heal in yourself. And by doing that, you're bringing that healing within. So I want to thank you all so much for your time, your generosity of spirit, and your sharing. And this has certainly changed my life, and I hope that there are people who are viewing and listening that may have been inspired to confront this within themselves or do something about it, or if they are capable of providing a service, getting it out there, getting to be on some kind of list that can be incorporated into an agency as an outside private source that can be utilized for help.
Mm.
Because I've heard too many nightmares about third, fourth, fifth generation abused people allowing that to continue because they were terrified to confront it.
Right.
Mhm.
You all did. So thank you all very much. If
Thank
anybody in the
you.
audience has any questions, please let us know now, because I'm getting like really emotional and I'm going to look really ugly soon.
Anthony,
You
I
can,
just want to say thank you to you for bringing this out and being willing to do a show about this, because
well, you know
not a
me.
lot of
I'm like
people
one of those
want
hold my
to.
beer guys. You tell me, no, 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 I'm going there. I will go there, especially now that I'm old. It's like, but you're very welcome for that. And you were so receptive. All of you were so receptive that I can't thank you enough for finally getting this out here. And I hope that Scott gets like swamped with emails from people who want to know more or who want to do something about this with us, because
Yeah.
this is the way you start it. You just
Mhm.
get it out and you let everybody know that it's okay.
Yeah.
Somebody's going bananas. It's
And
probably
I
Scott
just,
telling me to
A-
shut up.
Anthony, I went ahead and put my website, bellpfau.com, in the
Perfect.
chat box as well. So
Perfect.
feel
Okay,
free to
so
contact me through that website, anybody
okay.
who wants to do
So it's
anything.
bellpfau.com. You can
Hmm.
scroll up in there. So I think we should probably call it a night. And maybe just have a drink and toast each other when we're up here. But thank you all again.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you,
Thank you
Belle
so
and Shelley.
much.
You're so strong. You're amazing women.
Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate
And
it.
to our
Have a good
viewers-
evening, everybody.
To our viewers,
night.
thank you. See you next week when we have a whole other show coming on. You're going to love this one. It's all about your body, connecting to your mind and your spirit.
Yay.
So we have that coming next week. Check us at esoteric.nyc. Go to the events page, and I'll have the copy up there by tomorrow. And you'll get to meet my guests. So thank you again, ladies. You're extraordinary. I am so privileged. And Scott, you can get us off the air